Have you ever read a story that kept you riveted with every page? A real page turner that you simply could not drop because you wanted to know what happens next. Such a story must have had a really captivating plot. So, what is the plot of a story? In narrative writing, the plot is the thread of your story, the elements that shows how the series of events in the story are connected. The one that helps us answer questions like, what happens first? And then what happens next? And then after that, all the way to the end. If the series of events in a story are connected in a way that creates interest from the beginning, develops suspense in the middle, reaches a tense climax, and then has a satisfying ending, you would describe such a story as having a strong, well-developed, or absorbing plot. Conversely, a story that sends you to sleep out of boredom or leaves you more confused at the end definitely has a weak plot. So, how can you ensure that your story has an interesting plot? Let's talk about the basic plot structure that most stories have. The beginning of your story is known as the exposition. This is where you set the scene for your story. Your reader should know when and where your story is set, and who is involved in your story, that is, the characters. Next, you should introduce a problem, also known as conflict. This is an extremely important part of your plot, as it determines everything that happens afterwards. Think back to every story you have read or movie you have watched, and you will realize that they all have a problem. Perhaps a child got lost in the woods. A man got stranded on an island. Or some superheroes must travel back in time to undo an evil plot. You get the idea, right? This problem then sets off a series of events, and by the end of the story, it must have been resolved. Now, please make sure that the conflict of your story is quite challenging. This will help your characters develop through all their efforts to resolve the conflict or problem. It also creates the tension that gives your reader a reason to read on. The problem is followed by the rising action. This is the series of events that continues to make the problem more complicated. At this point, your characters would be having a series of misadventures that would further increase tension. Next, you have the climax. This is the point at which the conflict reaches the height of intensity. At this point in your story, the tension has built up so much that something has to change to reverse it. In most stories, this is where the protagonist confronts the problem in the most dramatic event of the story. After that, the story begins to come to a close with the falling action. This is a series of events that helps to further resolve the conflict. Finally, the resolution. This is simply the end of your story. As the name implies, the conflict has been fully resolved at this point. What we have been discussing is called the Freytag's Pyramid. And since it shows the basic structure of most stories, you can use it to plan and write your own narrative essay too. How? Supposing you have been asked to write a story that ends with the words, "That experience will linger on my mind for a long time." This is a perfect opportunity to write a riveting adventure story. Your setting could be an imaginary world, and your characters could be two young people who strongly dislike each other. The problem could be that they fell into a wormhole while fighting and ended up in a world where walls can talk, the sun shines at night, trees grow in spirals, and a powerful sorcerer has kept everyone in bondage. The rising action could be that they continue to quarrel, rather than work together to get back to the real world. Then at the climax, they get captured by the sorcerer and have to decide between working together to escape or getting locked up in a dungeon forever. How's that for an action-packed plot? To sum up, the plot is a particularly important element of your narrative writing. It shows how events are connected and determines whether your story will be boring or captivating. The conflict and climax are the most important element of the plot. The conflict sets the action of the story rolling, while the climax is the most intense, dramatic, and interesting part of the story. See you in the next lesson.